Okay, Python variables. A variable is a container in memory that holds values with which you may want to manipulate or refer to later on. So it can contain any alphabetic characters in its name, so capital A to Z or lowercase a to Z, digits 0 to 9, and the underscore character. But it cannot contain sort of the unusual characters such as ampersands, percentage signs, etc. So if you're not sure, just stick to alphanumeric characters. It is case sensitive, and you see a lot of problems where people are coding and they're referring to a variable name, and often it's down to something as simple as they've used an initial, uppercase character, and the next time they refer to it with a lowercase character. Or, in fact, they'll use like a plural, so they might say students and refer to students then in the text, where in fact the variable was declared as student. So just be careful of that when you're referring to it. The name cannot start with a digit. So, this is invalid, whereas this is fine. And obviously, we try and avoid all the reserved words. So, print, continue, max, min, length, any of those sort of words that I think are common in programming speak, just avoid them. And try and come up with a name that makes sense to the program that you're coding. So rather than Jackie 1, Jackie 2, Jackie 3, I mean, what do those mean? So student, words, whatever that makes sense. Okay, so a variable is defined once an initial value is assigned to it. So you can see my code down here. I've typed print points. I got an error because points was not defined. I didn't know what points was. So I then declared it as points was equal to 0. So it now knows that it's an integer and it's been assigned an initial value of 0. I then print it and it's fine. So we declare it with an equal sign. So it's whatever the variable name is equal to the initial value that it's set to. Okay, so points is equal to 5, name is equal to Tom, etc. And they will stay at 5 and Tom until they're overwritten. So they will stay until the program is shut down. So they're persistent in that they'll stay for the length of the program. If we want to keep them forever, we need to look at putting a database behind our system. But these will stay in that variable name until we shut down and restart the program. Okay, one little point how the Python differs from other programming languages. So if we just go back to that screen, we said here that I've defined a variable called points. I've given an initial value of 5, so it's an integer of 5. Python differs to other programming languages. With other programming languages which are strongly typed, you have to define a variable type. So points would be an integer type. Name is of the string data type, and it must always stay at that same data type. It can never change. But Python is much more forgiving. So I can assign 5 to points, and later on I can put in 5.67, and it'll change the type to a floating point data type or a real data type. So the types are interchangeable. Now that's handy, but it can actually cause problems later on when you're trying to do something with data in a variable and the type isn't consistent with what you want to try and do. But it's very forgiving in that regard. To change the value of a type, we simply reassign a new value to it. So you can see here, points was 10. I then simply typed code points is equal to 15, and it's replaced that value. One handy thing, the way we can increment, and this is common across all programming languages, is we can use the plus equals or the minus equals. So let's look here, for example. So I've printed score, and I print money spent. So score is 150, money spent's got 29.98 in it. One way I can change score, I can do score is equal to score plus 10. So I'm taking what was originally in score, I'm adding 10 to it, and putting that into score. So score was 150, I added 10, it became 160. So score is equal to the old value of score plus 10. I printed it there. That is also achieved by doing this. So score plus equals 10. Score plus equals 10 is increment score by 10. So score was 160, remember? It's now 170. And similarly, money spent, I could say money spent is equal to money spent minus 25, or money spent minus equals 25. So take a decrement money spent by 25 and print it, and I get 498 as a result there. So to find out what data types we have, Okay, so because we don't declare the variable with a data type as we would in C or Java, we'd have int name equals John, string name equals John, int score equals 150. With Python we don't, so we just assign a value and it works out what the type is based on the value that we assign when we initially assign a value to it. So we're given a function called type, and then we have the variable name inside the brackets. That tells us what the data type is. So for example here I've printed score, printed name, and I've just done concatenation here just for the fun of it. So name with a string, score with a string, another variable money spent. So that gives me 150 John. John has a score of 150 and he has spent 29.98. Okay. So what are the data types? So variable score has a data type of, and I concatenated that to it, to type score. So type score, and it tells me it's a class int. So it's the integer. Type name is the class string. So it's a string data type. And money spent is a type float. It's a floating data type or a real data type. Okay, so let's just look at some code. Okay. So here I have declared some variables. Counter is an int. Miles is a floating point because I've added the decimal place there. And John is a string. What we normally do, and although you don't need to do this, in Python you don't need to declare a variable at the very start of the program. When we think of a variable we want to use, we just start using that variable name. But it's good practice actually to think about your variables and put them in the top in this section, which we're going to call a declaration section. So let's say this little game I want to code. I need a player name, which I'm assigning an empty string to it. I need initial score and a current score, both of which I'm assigning zeros to. A bonus point is equal to 1. The max levels you can get to 6. Pi if I needed it. My welcome messages is going to print at the front of the screen. And here I've got a list of levels in the game. Entry, ground, upper and final. So it's good programming practice to think about what variables you want and declare them at the start of your code rather than just pop them anywhere around the center of the code. But that is allowed and Python will forgive you for doing that. Okay, so let's look at a little bit more code on strings. Okay, so this was if we're declaring something, say in C plus or so on. This we're declaring here. There's my type and there's my decrements here. Okay, so score plus 10, print score, score increment score by 10.